Hello and welcome back, everybody, to the DanJohnUniversity.com podcast. I'm Dan John, and this is episode 309. Each and every week, I sit down and I answer your questions. Listen, if you have a question, please send it to us at this address, podcast@DanJohnUniversity.com. Today, we don't have a lot of questions, but the questions are all long. So let's get going and let's see what happens. Our first question is from Jake. Almost a year ago, I completed the rite of passage with a 28 kilo kettlebell as written with the pull-ups. Okay, I've done the exact same thing myself. Jake, I did it to get ready for my first RKC certification, and I really thought the 28 was a great bell to prepare for the cert. I will explain in a minute what the rite of passage is. Then I did a few programs from your book, The Armor Building Formula. I was really happy to complete the double kettlebell program with two 24 kilo kettlebells. Now I'm back on the rite of passage using a 32 kilo kettlebell and pull-ups. I'm doing the pull-ups with 5 pounds this time. As I've heard you say, one knock on the rite of passage is the lack of squats. That is true. That's why I have people do the rite of passage to prepare for a cert or as a program. You know, it's not a lifestyle. Though, you know, you get a lot of good out of it, but we'll come back to that in a minute. So on the variety days, I've been doing front squats with 145 pounds and ladders of 2, 3, 5, 10. I like that. I'm making sure to match the weekly reps I'm doing with squats to the weekly reps of clean presses and pull-ups. That is a very good thing, folks. I believe your pushes, your pulls, and your squats should all be about the same number every week. And now, obviously, if you're doing a program, that'll change. But try to come back to that idea. 145 pounds is a decent challenge. And, of course, you know, you're doing 10 reps. So, yeah, considering the number of reps the program builds up to. Since you've talked about how much you love the rite of passage, do you think this is wise? I know I'm a sample of one, but am I wasting my time? No, you're not. Should I be concerned about the lack of squats? So the question, well, let's first off, okay, the rite of passage is probably my favorite program of Pavel for kettlebells. Basically, it's sets of ladders, and let's do it the way Jake is describing it. And this, I think, is the best way. You do a single clean and press with the left hand kettlebell, single kettlebell clean and press right hand, and then you do one pull-up. Next round, 2 clean and press left, 2 clean and press right, 2 pull-ups. 1, 2, 3, you just keep going up like that. The program is supposed to build up, and it is, I tell you, when you finish the last workout, so you do 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, 4, 4, 4, 5, 5, 5, and you do that for 5. You do that 5 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times 5. That gets you 75 clean and press with each hand and 75 pull-ups. When I finished that, that's when I was pretty sure I wasn't going to have any problems with the certification. Little did I know that we would be on a hot, dry field, and I would have problems, but that's another story. The Armor Building Formula, of course, is my program. It's double kettlebell, 2 double kettlebell cleans, 1 double kettlebell press, and then 3 double kettlebell front squats. And you just build up to 30 rounds of that in the book Armor Building Formula, available at danjohnuniversity.com/bookstore. Squats and kettlebells have always been a bit of an issue. Even if you read, if you go back to, you know, the modern kettlebell movement starts when John Duquesne and Pavel have coffee one time. They start talking about, selling kettlebells, teaching kettlebells, certifying it. And it really did start the modern kettlebell movement. I have strength and health magazines from the early 1960s that still show kettlebell exercises as just being kind of normal. There's a really interesting one that has a whole variety of one finger and this arm wrestling movement where you put your hand, I don't know if I'd try this, but you put your hand, like you're arm wrestling the kettlebell with your hand starts on the table and you bring it like that. I don't know, it just never seemed healthy to me for the shoulders. I have kettlebell information from obviously the 1960s and 70s from the Soviet materials. You'll find them in the Track and Field Omni book in the very first edition in 1971. And of course, I watched the Soviet hammer throwers down at the College of San Mateo. And I'm thinking this is 75 or 76 when the one guy finished his training by throwing kettlebells. And of course, here in the United States, and I've explained this before, we misunderstood what they meant by pood and translated into pud. And so you could find in Gill Athletics catalogs for years, puds, also known as AKA throwing weights, that look kind of like paint cans, and they feel like paint cans to me, that weigh 20 pounds, say. I mean, throwing kettlebells is a really good training device. I have an article somewhere with the German javelin throwers doing this really interesting contest with a kettlebell, including one of them. These are javelin throwers. They would put it on their foot and see how far they could throw it. Now, I don't know the value of that either, but it sure seemed fun. So when Pavel and John sat down, they gave us the modern kettlebell movement, okay? One of the things you'll find early in Pavel's writings, and I'm pretty sure it could be Enter the Kettlebell, but it's got to be one I've read a number of times, where he talks about how having big, thick legs are not important. One of the things that it's almost an axiom I've used in my adult life is increase your hinge, your deadlift, clean, snatch, those, and maintain your squat, especially if you're an athlete, because once a man gets to about a 400-pound squat, most of the benefits of that exercise are there. Now, that's an athlete, not a power lifter, not an Olympic lifter, and if someone needs to do it, obviously do more. The lack of squats in a lot of kettlebell programs, Rite of Passage is the example we use, is pretty obvious to anybody who spends time in a normal gym, Olympic lifting, powerlifting. You see a lot more leg work than you would see from the Rite of Passage. Don't forget, I forgot to add, at the end of every Rite of Passage workout, you either do swings for a while or snatches for a while. So you get a lot of hinge work in there. The lack of squats, it's going to be one of those things, Jake. This is a very specific answer to you. You're putting them in. If you do the Rite of Passage the way it's supposed to be, it's 3 days a week with variety days. And I think you've done a really smart thing by sticking squats in those variety days. And those are front squats, which are probably, in my perfect universe, when I invent one, I'm going to have the front squat and the overhead squat will be, when we say squats, either one of those two, what we'll be thinking about. In the multiverse, I'm pretty sure it's already happening. That was an attempt at humor. I think you're doing the right thing, folks. Jake, folks, I want you to listen to what Jake did. He took a program, he saw a gap, and he added it on the other days. And I think that's the key, no matter what programming. Now, I love lifting 3 days a week. I've discovered it and rediscovered it, that in my personal case, 3 days a week of lifting is the best for me. I think if you talk with most athletes, because you're generally juggling, a lot of time throwing, tackling, doing other things, blocking, whatever you're shooting, whatever your sport is, we have to spend a lot of time out there doing a whole bunch of other things. So if you have a program like the Rite of Passage and you're using it for a sport, you might have to supplement it with more squats. Or like I usually tell people, do your goblet squats in what you perceive as your warm-up, or even tag them on at the end. One of the things that people who do the armor building formula, the actual armor building formula, not just the armor building complex, is one of the things they find is that doing that volume of squats, if you did 30 rounds, that's 90 squats. Doing 90 squats once or twice a week is a lot of volume, and it does a lot of good for you. I mean, that's kind of a duh statement, but I think it's important to keep that in mind, is that you want a program that has some variety built in. Of course, in the ABF, we have a pressing day and we have an ABC day. When I'm getting ready for an Olympic lifting meet, I don't have any variety. 3 days a week, I Olympic lift, I snatch, I clean and jerk, and I front squat to prepare myself for an Olympic lifting meet. So variety is great, except when you're hyper-focused. If you're going to get Jake, if you're doing this program to get ready for a certification, stick with the rite of passage and add extra practice days a week instead of the squats. But your answer is really good, and I like it. So, folks, I think this is nice. Just for those of you who listen to the podcast a lot, and you only have a single kettlebell or whatever the situation is, Jake's idea here is a good way to go. So 3 days a week, rite of passage, and then you add that one extra day of squats as your variety day. Good. It's a good thing to remember, and thank you, Jake. Okay, we have a question from Daniel. Now, the interesting thing is, I know Daniel, and I told my daughters about getting this email, and they were both excited because he's a great guy, and it just makes me happy to see that we're still in touch. I'm an old camper of yours from John Powell's summer camps. I've been listening to your podcast since I discovered it, and love whenever you get questions or comments about the discus. I currently live in Oklahoma. Well, I had a friend from Oklahoma. Whenever he said that, we'd always say, "Oh, I'm so sorry," but we'll move on. I currently live in Oklahoma, not 30 minutes from where the men's discus world records have been shattered. Not once, not twice, but 3 times in the past 2 years. Not to mention the women's American record, along with various international records for men and women. Yeah, it's amazing. I always thought that world records for the jumps were occasionally nullified because of the wind, whereas in the discus, where it arguably matters a whole lot more, and it doesn't have any wind clause. To be clear, I'm not advocating for one. So folks, as a right-handed thrower, for those you don't know, the discus is aerodynamic. So if the wind is blowing at my right eye, I would always get really excited because I knew it was a good day to throw. I'm going to read the whole thing, and then I'm going to defend what we do. The recent records in Ramona have sparked mild controversy, though. I just saw an article where some European commentators called it wind doping. Oh, for God's sake. Okay. But I can't help but feel this is different, as all competitors at that moment are able to benefit from it. I agree with you. Yes, competitors not able to afford the travel don't get the benefit, but if you're a world-class elite thrower, you have to travel for competitions anyway. I realize I'm getting a little long-winded, but I didn't want to miss one more perspective. I learned that the venue was designed to maximize the opportunity for all throwers to benefit from wind on any given day, even allowing left-handers to throw in a completely different circle in the same competition to take advantage of the optimal wind direction, eliminating a typical disadvantage these throwers face, as stadiums optimized for specific wind directions could typically do so for right-handers. That said, I'd like to know if you have any thoughts on this, and if you're planning to come to Oklahoma to try and set a Masters record anytime soon. Well, thank you, Daniel. I know this is a question that is, specific to our beloved discus throwing, the only sport specifically mentioned in the Bible. 2 Maccabees at the call of the discus, all the boys men went running, and of course, if you read the Iliad and the Odyssey, Ulysses is a discus thrower. So, if it's in the Bible and in the Iliad and the Odyssey, obviously it's really important. It really bothers me when I see that argument about it because, they did this to Paul Northway when he threw his Track and Field News, which is always, for some reasons, never seemed to understand the discus. It's when you talk to the late, great John Powell, when you talk to even Mac Wilkins would write letters to the editor, they don't seem to understand the discus and Track and Field News. So when Paul threw that monster throw his senior year, they had to say very, and they put like 5 R's, windy conditions. I'm like, oh, stop it. If you're a thrower in Utah, you probably have most of your track meets either in snow or rain or with snow around you. It's cold, the winds are terrible, the rings are slick, it's not fun. So we go to one meet with good conditions and we throw farther and everyone says, oh, it was the wind. Come on. One of the things you'll learn about all sports is that all sports have this thing called wind doping, but in basketball, there's a thing I call height doping. I mean, if you're not tall, you're gonna have a real hard time making it as a professional basketball player. When you meet elite female gymnasts, one of the things you'll notice is that they're not very tall. When you meet, it's unusual to find a surfer who's not from certain parts of California or Hawaii or certain other places that are friendly to surfing. When I travel through Canada, I'm never surprised that hockey is popular because hockey rinks are really common in Canada. I mean, should we, add, if in the Olympics, Canada's playing Ecuador in ice hockey because Ecuador doesn't have as many hockey rinks. I don't know if Ecuador has any hockey rinks. I don't know. But we don't give them like extra points because of the Canadian advantage of more hockey rinks. All sports, we're all looking for, in skiing, there's a phrase, we're all looking for is it the edge? I think it is. We're all looking for that. We're all looking for the right line down the slopes. In cross-country skiing, especially in the classic style, if you make a mistake with your wax in the classic style, not necessarily the skating style, you'll lose the competition because of bad waxing choice. Well, so if someone invents a new wax, all the rules change. So every sport has its own little tricks and adaptions. I'm working with a guy who's moving up in the Highland Games, and one of the things is if you take somebody who was a college discus thrower and you teach them the Highland Games, they're going to be really good quite quickly at some of the events. There should be no surprise that Brian Oldfield still owns the stone put records. He was a shot putter. Every sport has advantages that you get. If you're taller than everybody else, you have an advantage as a young basketball player. We know in certain sports that are age graded, you can be 364 days older than the boys you're competing, the girls you're competing with, which is a massive advantage in the fifth. If you're 5, 6, 7 years old, it's not so big after, say after 15 or 16, but it's still there. All sports have things that we are chasing. And I don't think it's fair that we've picked the discus in this one track meet as a problem. I am glad that Alekna has the record. I think his technique is gorgeous, and obviously he got a lot from his father. But I just think that's the nature of sports. We don't have any asterisks on, for example, Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point basketball game. Nobody said, well, it's because, no one does that. People do it with some records in baseball because of the use of drugs. And it's like, yeah, no one ever did drugs before then in any sport. But thank you. And it's great to hear your voice, even a letter. And we very much think highly of you. And I was looking at one of my old newsletters, and it was a picture of you doing when I was teaching you all how to Olympic lift in the dorm room, and it just brought back great memories. So thank you. And fun question, and I hope everybody else got something out of it. So we have a question from Liam. Liam says this: before the pandemic, I was in decent shape for a non-athlete 30-something with a desk job thanks to my mix of yoga, calisthenics, and barbells. But I struggled badly from 2020 to 2023 after really letting myself go. I was in rough shape and having a hard time getting back into the gym after the world opened back up for business. That changed in January 2024 when I started practicing with kettlebells and taking boxing classes every week. Oh, that's interesting. Since then, I box an average of 2 to 3 times a week and practice with kettlebells 2 to 3 times a week. And I've had a great time in the process. Now I'm in good shape for a non-athlete 39-year-old with a desk job. Liam, I really do like the poetry there and that nice little chiasm you did to bring it all right back to the start. I haven't touched a barbell or a dumbbell in years, and this summer I'd like to change that. I plan to keep boxing at least 2 to 3 times a week, every week, and I'd like to lift weights at least a couple of times a week as well. Because so much of punching power comes from leg and back strength, and because the double kettlebell front squat has been so helpful for me, the barbell front squat is a lift that I feel like I need to learn. I'm unsure if I have the mobility to pull it off though, and I was hoping you could advise me on what stretches and other preparations I should work on for the rest of the spring before I start attempting in earnest this summer. So flexibility for the front squat. I also intend to work on my deadlift, something I haven't done in a while, dumbbell rows and kettlebell overhead press, as it's more similar to throwing a punch than barbell bench. Are there any other lifts that you think I should add to the mix, or any other feedback you have on this plan? The one exercise I would, and this is just because of my work, throwing a punch is a lot like throwing a ball or a discus or a shot. It would be suitcase carries, that one hand farmer walk. I would really recommend that for you. I think there's real value for anybody who does any kind of striking, kicking, any kind of twisting at all, because at every step it builds that other side, and I think there's great value to that. Now, I've talked about this on this podcast before, but boy, I bet you it could have been 6 or 7 years ago. So I'm a great believer in doing wrist mobility work. On our Thursdays, we do a whole series of them. And let me just show you some of the basics here on the podcast. For those of you listening, it's going to be a little bit odd for a few seconds, but the standard one is always this. You take your hand like this and you push your fingers. The only problem with this particular stretch is that by the way, and I can feel it all the way down my wrist, but you're really not moving. So if you're going to do that stretch, it's more than just pushing the fingers back. You want to drive the wrist into it. Now, here's the issue with people just doing this with wrist flexibility, is that the wrist is a marvelous structure. Now, I broke this wrist into a lot of pieces, so I'm a little more knowledgeable about wrists than anything else. But so the biggest issue is people do a lot of stretching this way, but you want to make sure you're flexible in all directions. Okay, so one of the things we do a lot is you're going to put your baby finger on your sternum. You're going to grab your thumb and pull it away. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to gently just glide my wrist down my sternum, down my 8-pack, and down towards my belly button, okay? And I'm stretching like this. Now, the nice thing is now we can just do some simple turns with this too, but we're trying to, it's not exactly a ball socket, but I'm envisioning that as I'm talking to you, stretching the wrist on a ball as a ball socket. Now, we have two others we do in our gym. One is we call these fins, is that you're going to put your hand on the ground or your desk, and you're going to stack your fingers up like shark fin, okay? Not like this, but straight, and then you're going to push into it. Now, we do these like we're doing a push-up. Now, make sure you have your knees on the ground. I don't know. Yeah, man, that would hurt a lot to do that. So the outward fins, like a push-up, 6-point position is best. And then we have its opposite, which we call inward finwards, okay? Because it's funny. And on that one, again, you can try to do a bit of a push-up. No matter how I do them, I don't have a lot of mobility on that particular one. So first, try to stretch your wrists in 4 different directions. The next one, even if you do all that flexibility or work for your wrist, the actual front squat is going to need a little bit of love. One of the things I recommend is make sure you have some weight on the bar, because otherwise, like when I do broomstick clean and jerks, I have to put my chin on it to hold it in place because it bounces right up. So you can put weight on the bar, and I just want you to do this one at a time. Get a full grip on the bar, and then you're going to push that elbow up into that front squat position, up, 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 up. You're going to put your body weight in there, and then I want you to roll around and keep it. Do this one hand at a time. Then you do the other hand, you do it, and then putting your fingertips on the bar, slide yourself in and get a sense of what's tightening up on that front squat mobility. You'll notice a lot of people have very flexible fingers when they do front squats because they're barely holding on to the bar like this. There are some people, and this is when you know you have a real natural, they can have a full, deep grip on that front squat. A lot of people in our audience will never be able to do an actual barbell front squat. They're going to have to change things around. For most people, I prefer the Frankenstein front squat. That's where both hands are extended out like this, like some, bad 1930s Frankenstein movie. I'm not a big fan of this style, sometimes called the bodybuilder front squat. The reason is when people do this, very often they start to lean over, and when they're, instead of front squatting nice and tall, they begin to hunch over a little bit. What's nice about the Frankenstein style is you can see it, and if you do lean over, the bar slides, sets over. So if you're gonna do the Frankenstein style, you'll really notice how how much it takes away from your max efforts. It really does, because you have to stay so tall. Then there's the other thing of using straps, and this has become more popular since the advent of the internet, much more popular. I don't know if I ever saw it before this millennium, but it's where you take straps and you strap your hands in, so you are being forced to stretch that out, okay? The front squat isn't for everyone. One thing, I don't know if Larry Draper still sells these, but Dave Draper invented something called the True Squat, TRU squat. And it is a padded rack here with the hands, with handles that go here on the barbell. I really like that. When I was training my athletes at the school, one of the schools I used to coach at, I bought enough for the entire facility. And what I found is that we could do workouts with goblet squat, front squat, overhead squat with this group, back squats, and then the true squat. What was interesting about the true squat is that many of the athletes found that the true squat didn't have that hit that a lot of squatting and deadlifting, they have a hit to them. When you do a max deadlift, you stay beat up for a while, even though it was only one attempt. I used to think it was that squats and deadlifts are just harder on the central nervous system. I'm sure that's part of it. I'm sure that since they hit nearly every muscle in the body, that's part of it. And the fact that, when you're squatting and deadlifting, you're using, say, 600 pounds versus, when you clean, it's 300 pounds. And, gravity is real and it impacts you. I hope that helps. I think a lot of us got not misguided. There's got to be a softer word than that. But when the kettlebell became popular, a lot of people drew lines in the sand. I'm a barbell guy. I'm a kettlebell guy. There are even people who say they're only dumbbells only, and I know, okay, whatever, For me, these are all just tools, and so I like the idea of mixing and matching kettlebells, dumbbells, mini bands, Brett Contreras' glute loops, hip thrust machines, pull-ups. I like having all my tools available to me. So for those of you who, I know there's places online that are really tribal about this is the only thing that works. Folks, everything works. Everything works for about 6 weeks, and then you have to find some variations. Fun question. Thank you, and I hope I helped you. We have a question from Warren. And Warren says this: I was listening to your content on the Olympic lifts and began to wonder, when or why should an athlete choose the hardstyle clean and jerk and snatch ballistic lifts over the barbell Olympic lifts and vice versa? As opposed to an either-or premise, can you elaborate on the pros and cons of either approach? What is there to miss out on or gain in spending time with one approach over the other? Okay, so I'm an Olympic lifter, but I'm also a master kettlebell instructor. So I feel like you're asking me which one is my favorite daughter. It's a tough question, and I ain't gonna answer it. And because they're both my favorite, and I like both. So the advantage of the Olympic lifts, well, for me, there's a big advantage. You can compete. You can go to a meet and step up on the platform. They'll have officials there. They'll have loaders. They'll have chalk, and you can compete. You can measure yourself against people who weigh about the same amount you weigh. People of the same gender and masters, people basically the same age group. You can just measure and see how things are going. As a discus thrower, Olympic lifting was the reason I threw far. In hindsight, I kind of wished I'd have done maybe more power cleans than squat cleans. In hindsight, I probably didn't need to go as heavy as I used to go all the time because, again, how much it beats up on that central nervous system. But the thing about the Olympic lifts, when you say whole body movements, I don't know of anything that's more whole body. You take the weight from the ground and you put it overhead. In the snatch, you do it very quickly. In the clean and jerk, you have the two movements. And there's a lot of load. I've said this many times on this podcast that, if you only had two goals, to clean and press your body weight and snatch your body weight, for most of our listeners, all your dreams would come true. If you can snatch and clean and press your body weight, you are strong, you're flexible, you're mobile, and you'll probably look pretty good. I think I mentioned in one of my podcasts recently that one of my former throwers is becoming a throws coach. And she asked me a question about, what should I do with the men that she's coaching? I said, well, a good thing for you to do is to encourage them to clean and press their body weight and snatch their body weight. And she goes, yeah, but they're so far away from it. And I said, are they far away from it because of body fat or because of strength? Because, if you should weigh 200, but you're walking around weighing 300, which 50%, or whatever that percent would be, a third of your body is fat. That's a lot. Well, you can approach this two ways. If you're a 300 pounder clean and jerking, clean and pressing 200, you can either put your nose to the grindstone in the weight room and just keep fighting that great fight, or maybe drop a few pounds. The interesting thing is, I think both options would make most of the throwers I interact with better. I think the kettlebell Olympic lifts, and you pick the clean, the jerk, and the snatch. One thing is you don't have so much of the needs for the flexibility that you do with the barbell. And that by itself is a bonus for a lot of the people I work with. When I first started getting kettlebells, one of the things I picked up is most of the kettlebellers I knew were broken from sports, usually strength sports, but they were all broken. And one of the things I heard universally when I first started kettlebells is how, you get this big engine guy saying, I feel like I can train again. Kettlebells are pretty, there's a phrase in kettlebell coaching, there are no wrists in kettlebells. Well, a lot of the guys I work with, including myself, I broke this wrist, I've had 2 surgeries on it. And I'm not supposed to be able to do that ever again, but I am. So one of the things I liked when I was able to, when I first did kettlebells, I was surprised at how nice it was. When the weather changes here in Utah, I usually know early because of my wrist issues. I'm always amazed when people say that people with artificial hips and metal in their body and arthritis can't tell. We're told by doctors, oh, that's just imaginary. You don't know when the weather's changing, except I know when the weather's changing. Kettlebells are very friendly to beat up broken athletes. I think the learning curve is a lot quicker. I think I could probably teach you the kettlebell snatch so that you're using it for training purposes. If not in 1 training session, certainly in 2. And the only thing I know I can teach you the basics of it. It's just that it does, until you get it right, there is you do get a little beat up on it. A lot of people the bell smashes on their hands, which is easily fixable, but you have to go through the process of learning how to do it. Kettlebells are generally quicker to teach, quicker to learn. Kettlebells tend to be easier on the joints. Kettlebells can also be stored in a corner versus when I do my Olympic lifts, I now have, I think I have 5 Olympic bars. But I still have to pull the Olympic bar out. I have to make sure I have a platform, which I do. I stack it and I got to put the weights on. It takes up a lot of room. When I drove across the United States last year, I had an Olympic lifting meet. I had the state meet. On our team almost won. We lost by like just a point for the state championship, which would have been wonderful for those of us on the team. When I drove across the United States, I took my barbell and my bumper plates and my lifting boots and a whole bunch of other stuff. And remember, I have my Maserati I had to slide the barbell. I had to put the seats down, the back seat, slide the barbell through the trunk, had someone have to pick it up in the middle, slide it on the console. So when I drove across the United States and Canada, I had my barbell right here. And I was hoping I was get pulled over by a cop so I could explain that. The years before, I've traveled with kettlebells. Let me show you what to do with the kettlebell. You take the kettlebell, you put it in the back seat, you put a seat belt on it, and you're done. When you pull over to the side of the road and you want to get to your goblet squats in or your clean and presses or your armor building complex in, you pull over the side of the road and you pull it out and you do the workout. In fact, the single hand kettlebell complex, I filmed it in Island Pond, Vermont. You can see the island of the Island Pond in the background there. I have pictures of me Olympic lifting on the side of the road, and it takes just a lot longer to do it. So for ease of teaching and ease of transport and ease of storage, I think the kettlebell is better. For carryover into the sports I coach, American football, the track and field, it's the Olympic barbell. But the best thing to think of, and this is the money one, Warren, is the answer is both. If you can get yourself to use your barbell and use your kettlebell, and you can work them together, like my good friend Tim Anderson always says about easy strength and original strength, they're peas and carrots. But he says in that Forrest Gump style. But I think barbells and kettlebell Olympic lifts are peas and carrots. I have a program called the Transformation Program where I actually brought in on one of the days. So the Transformation Program, it's real simple. It's the fastest workout I have. It's if an athlete's coming off American football, getting ready for track season, if it's late in the season and we just need to keep some lean body mass up, we want to lift, but we don't want to do too much. Real quick. It's 3 sets of 8 with an exact minute rest. And that sounds easy until one of the workouts, which I'll come up. So generally it can be military press and power curl, or it can be bench press and power curl, or it can be incline bench press and power curl. That's day 1. That's only 6 sets. 3 sets of 8 of each of those, minute rest. Workout to take less than 9 minutes most of the time. But you get a good pump, you feel good. 2 days later, it's the hard day. Front squat and overhead squat, 3 sets of 8. Week 1, you do front squats to warm up the overhead squat. Week 2, overhead squat to warm up the front squat so you can add some load. And on the 3rd day is the whip snatch, the wide grip, high hang snatch, and the clean grip snatch, 3 sets of 8. Well, I experimented with keeping the first 2 days the exact same and then doing high rep kettlebell snatches for the 3rd day. And I got to tell you, I believe the first time I experimented with this, the very first time I didn't have a kettlebell. All I had was a 61-pound dumbbell. Now, why it was at 61 pounds is because the dumbbell, it was an adjustable dumbbell. It was an Olympic dumbbell, and I put on 25-pound plates, 50, but the dumbbell was it was a kilo plate, so it was 61 pounds. And, so I would do all these dumbbell snatches, and it didn't work out very well. And then a couple of years ago with Coach Barbera at Juan Diego, I did the same experiment, doing those high rep kettlebell snatches. And I got to tell you, as conditioned as I thought I was getting in with the 3 sets of 8 in the whip and clean grip, it was nothing like doing hundreds of kettlebell snatches. So there's a very simple program for you that would combine barbell and kettlebells and keep it very minimal. And someone might say, well, how many snatches can you do in 10 minutes? Well, my record is 200. I mean, that's a lot of snatches. So I hope that helped. And it was a fun question. If I think anything else, or we can have a discussion in the notes below, I'll add it too. Because Warren, I think this is a fun question. So thank you. Well, there we go. Each and every week I sit down here and I answer your questions. If you have questions, please send them to the podcast at this address, podcast@danjohnuniversity.com. I love answering your questions. And until next time, let's all keep on lifting and learning. Thank you.